Hello, everyone. I think we'll get started here. So good afternoon, and welcome to the session titled The Role of the Global South in Mitigating AI Risks. I'm Claire Dennis, and I'll be the MC for this session. This panel will discuss the importance of including the Global South in AI governance and safety efforts, as well as some more specific research projects related to this topic. The session will last 50 minutes, and first we will hear from our speakers and then move on to a live Q&A session. As a reminder, you can submit your questions for the speakers through the live interaction feature on the SwapCard app, and I'll select from the top voted questions there. There will also be office hours immediately following this event in Docklands with both of the speakers. So first, we will hear from Cecil Abungu. Cecil is a PhD student at the University of Cambridge and a research affiliate at the Center for the Study of Existential Risk, as well as the Institute for Law and AI. His recent work has focused on the role of developing countries in global catastrophic risks-related governance of AI. Please join me in welcoming Cecil.
Right. Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot, Claire. So I'm going to use my time in three ways. So I'll start by maybe making a case for a deontological case, which is well known for why these countries and their peoples matter in AI governance, or rather AI X-risk governance. Then I'll make a case for also utilitarian reasons why they should matter. And then finally, I'll spend most of my time on specific questions that those who want to help ensure there's no X risk coming out of AI can work on if they also want to do work that's related to Global South countries. Okay. So, the deontological case is pretty straightforward. It's been made by many people. I guess this is where the so-called AI ethics camp and AI safety camp can have a connection. I mean, equal moral worth, if you believe in that, global majority. So it really makes sense that we want to hear from them, and we want to take into account their views, their cultures in shaping kind of a technology that will could dramatically alter the future that they'll live in. The utilitarian case, I guess, that's a bit less emphasized on. But if you specifically care about preventing AI X risk, there's still good reasons to care about Global South countries. Now, for example, in a paper with Michelle Malonza and Sumaya Noor last year, we proposed that some countries could be sites for training frontier AI in future, for example, India, because the kinds of supercomputers they're trying to, the strategies with supercomputers they're trying to put in place, the collocation data centers they have, etc. We proposed that some places could also be testing sites. So this is from other kinds of AI, what we've seen with other kinds of AI, it's possible that some countries in the Global South could be testing sites. And then it's possible that they will play a role in shaping international governance. This we're a lot more confident about. We studied international environmental governance and international trade governance, and we sort of saw ways in which they shaped that kind of governance. So there's good reason to think they might be able to shape these kinds of governance. Yeah, then it's possible as well, as someone like Maria Teresa has suggested, that they could be examples in how to govern. Like just seeing how they govern AI could help other places in the world decide how to govern. And finally, they have real roles in shaping attitudes in global North countries. So there is a considerable group of people in global North countries who care, I think, about leaving out a large group of people from this conversation. So if you care about how this should go, then you should care about this. Okay. So now I'm going to spend most of my time on the kinds of projects, because one of the things that's challenging is I find it a compelling case that U.S. policy is still the most important. But I think it's careless or short-sighted not to have some people working on the global south countries for the reasons I've given. But again, the question would be, what exactly would they do? What sort of projects would you do that are actually useful to this kind of thing? And so I want to get through 5 possibilities that hopefully I'll put out in a more detailed write-up much later. So first, I think there's room for methodically rigorous studies on how to get the countries and the peoples to care. So far, my sense is the paths forward are more intuitive, like intuitively decided. But I think with sufficiently sophisticated methods, looking at historical ways in which these countries were gotten to care about other topics, alongside like trends right now, we might be able to find more rigorous evidence on which paths to pursue. Another one is, I think there's space for studies that bring to light unique ways in which these countries have unique governance strategies that these countries have used to respond to other high risks. So it's true that AI risk is unique, and it's hard to find anything analogous to it. But I think there are other high risks that many of these countries have found unique ways to respond to. As an example, for example, the strategies that Colombia, South Africa used to respond to errant leadership and structure their constitutions, that's widely regarded by constitutional law scholars as unique, how they responded. So it's sort of finding those kinds of ideas and seeing how we could adapt how they responded to other high risks ideas, high risks to AI risk itself. Third, I think there's a lot of space for studies on the levers that the countries and their people can use to influence governance in global north countries. For example, the obvious example is international law. But outside international law, I think, for instance, it is possible that like coalitions of civil society organizations, just as has happened in climate change sometimes, could be used to also influence AI governance in global north countries. So like the levels that we need to put effort into, I think there's space there for work that touches on that. Fourth, I think there's space for studies on like how certain developments in economic development, social developments in certain global south countries could influence AI governance that's related to X risk. For example, like what does it mean for BRICS to grow and become larger? Like what would that mean for AI governance? Another example is, in India, the deal between NVIDIA and Reliance. What might that mean? Or the supercomputing like efforts that India is putting into AI? What might that mean for AI governance? Or the idea of AI sovereignty that's being pushed around right now? What might that mean for AI governance? Yeah. And finally, I think there's also room for studies that focus on investigating and documenting unique harms that the so-called frontier AI is having in these countries. There's already plenty of work on the kinds of harms or the kinds of risks that frontier AI poses in like the US and the UK. But I feel like there's a lot of room for what kind of risks they pose in countries with a very, very different culture, very different life going on. Just to give one example, I know of a scenario where ChatGPT is used to fully write a textbook for primary school students, and this is a contracted textbook. Government contracted the textbook, and ChatGPT is used. And well, so what does that mean? Like the whole textbook is written based on the info from ChatGPT, and so on and so forth. So those are just possible useful kinds of projects I think people can work on that might help us advocate for regulation and governance, or might also help us understand frontier AI better and how we ought to govern it. So yeah, in conclusion, I think it would be, as I said earlier, it would be careless and short-sighted to just not put some effort into involving these countries and hearing from these countries and their people. And yeah, and there's some real useful work that people can do if they want to get into this field. And if you know any kind of grant makers, I think you should encourage them to support that kind of work as well. Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Cecil. And if people have specific questions, you can submit them on the Swapcard app, and we'll go through them during the Q&A. So next, we will hear from Roberto Tinoco. Roberto is a Colombian lawyer who works as a science diplomat at the Observatorio de Riesgos Catastróficos Globales. This is an organization dedicated to managing global catastrophic risks in Spanish-speaking countries. Roberto is currently working to develop national AI strategies and laws in numerous Latin American countries, including Mexico, Colombia, Chile, and Brazil. Please join me in welcoming Roberto.
Thank you very much, Claire. Thank you very much to the organizers of the event. We are very pleased to be here as myself representing the Observatorio de Riesgos Catastróficos Globales. And I will guide the presentation into three main questions. The first one is, the concept of the Global South, when it comes from. So why we are talking about the Global South and what does it mean? The second one is what are the risks of excluding the Global South countries into the debates related to AI governance. The second one is why should these countries should be considered into the different mechanisms that are created right now, or the debates or the conversations that the different societies are having regarding AI governance. And the third one is how it can be, like how these countries can also participate into these different discussions. So the first one that I would like to highlight is the idea of the Global South. This is a map that represents the idea. So at the end, it was an idea of the beginning of the 80s. It was created by a German politician. The name is William Brandt. But before that, during the 50s, there was also a French guy, a demographer, an economist, his name is Alfred Sauvy, who created like this idea of three different worlds, the first world, the second world, and the third world. So for him, like the first world was the developed one, related also with the second world. So it was the relation between the American and the Soviet Union. And the third world was like the countries that were not considered like into the international system. So he created like this idea of the third world. But after that, during the 60s, then an American politician created this concept of the global north and the global south. But it was in the context of the Vietnam War. And it was this idea that the North do a lot of things and is developed, and its supremacy can be also harmful to the global south countries. So at the end, the concept prevailed, and we will see how we are using it during nowadays. And one of the things that I would like to highlight also is that although the concept can be sometimes misleading, or sometimes it is inaccurate, or it tends to generalize almost 140 countries, it is used by ourselves. I mean, it's like countries like Colombia, or the countries in Latin America, countries in Africa, countries in South Asia, they like the concept of Global South. And this photo is from this year, in January, when they celebrate the third South Summit. So this is like a concept, or within the G77 group that was created during the 60s, and they took this concept of the Global South, and they were a diplomatic group that is incorporated not only by 77 countries right now, but almost by 135. And the curious thing is that at the beginning, China belongs to that group, but now the group is called the G77 plus China. But there is still this idea that the Global South has something to say to the world, not only in terms of artificial intelligence, but in other topics like climate change. And during this third South Summit, the first one was in the 20s, and it was celebrated in Cuba. The second one was celebrated in Qatar, and this third one was celebrated just this year. It's like almost 20 years after, and it was celebrated in Uganda. So at the end, the message is that even though I don't like the concept of the Global South, it can be very useful in terms of AI governance, and then we will see why is that. Another proposal that we have here is maybe to consider that some countries, or there can be like a geographical identification of countries in the Global South, according to the region. So then, of course, we have the Latin American and the Caribbean, composed from Mexico to Argentina and Chile. You can have also consider like it's Europe and Central Asia, when it's Azerbaijan, Turkey, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan. Also, we can talk about South Asia or the Sub-Saharan Africa. We can talk about also of the Middle East and North Africa, and we can talk about the East Asia and Pacific, and maybe excluding China right now. So this is another way that maybe is more approachable in order to understand what is the Global South, and we will see at the end, I will focus on specifically in Latin America, and how we think it could be useful in terms of AI governance. So the first question is, what are the potential risks of excluding the Global South from AI governance discussions? I think this is a very good starting point. And let's try to think about like these 8 topics. And please feel free just to criticize them and be very critical about them, because this is something that we are developing right now at the organization. So the first reason, or the first risk of excluding the Global South countries into the AI governance discussions is related to testing grounds. So let me ask you something. Is what do you think if, for example, then you have very good regulations in the United States, you have now the European Union AI Act, then maybe you can create also very good regulations in China, but there are no regulations in other parts of the world. Do you think that maybe there are some companies that are going to be maybe there are going to be incentives to test some unregulated artificial intelligence models in other countries? That might happen. It had happened before with other topics, so why it is going to happen right now with artificial intelligence models? The other one are the ethical breaches, and when we are mentioning ethical breaches, we are referring to the uses of the artificial intelligence models. So when you are thinking about the artificial intelligence models, you must consider some norms and values that are unique in these kind of regions that are not considered maybe when you are training the model, and that's very important, but we are talking only about norms and values. When we are talking about societal harm, then we are talking about the damages that it can cause, because if you do not consider these kind of things when you are testing a model and then you deploy it in these countries, then you can face also societal harms that they may not be considered during testing the artificial intelligence model. And when we're talking about harmful outcomes, we're talking about is political instability. So what happens when these models are deployed in some countries that may face political instability? The governments are going to use it properly or not? It's a question that is also might be asked. And the other ones are the limited resources, and this is related to risk management. So in many countries in the global south, you can find also that maybe we don't have the capacity to respond some risks as may do some global north countries, like for example, unemployment. I think that maybe in the United States, in the United Kingdom, you can find, for example, unemployment insurances that are far better than in many other countries in the global south. So at the end, at the end you have to consider the global south also, because in some point, in some risk, not all of them, then you might need some help, not only with resources, but also with technical expertise. The other one is leveraging capabilities, and this is the idea that at the end, for example, the models, then you will need this reinforcement learning from human feedback. And that feedback, it will come is from the end users. So that's really important, and it's really important to think about that at the end, if you want to put some feedback to the models, you must consider that it will be in the countries that it is deployed. And the last one is inconsistent regulation, as is just that you will vary some risk profiles, and then the ways that you are going to approach or to manage this kind of risk, they will be very different. So at the end, it might be better to just standardize some things related to risk management of artificial intelligence. And the last one is the lack of international cooperation. That is, this is related more with to prevent conflicts. So it is better right now that we are facing this competition between the United States and China, especially. Then if you improve the cooperation, the international cooperation, at the end, you will gain also into preventing some conflicts. So this is the other question that we bring to you. It is why it is important for countries in the global south. So I think that the risk lead us to, so why it is important. And I just want to highlight these 5 topics and give you some numbers related to it. So the first one, of course, is regulatory and legal frameworks. And when we are talking about the global south, we are talking about almost the 70% of the nations that belongs to the United Nations systems. Also is 68% of the population. So you are not going to consider 68% of the population regarding regulatory and legal frameworks. And also, specifically in LATAM, we are 33 countries, and we represent the 17% of the nations, and we equals the 8% of the population around the world. And also in Latin America, for example, we have some examples, historical examples, like the Tlatelolco Treaty that declares commonly, but all the 33 countries, that Latin America is a free zone of weapons of mass destruction. It will happen the same, because last year you find also similar when the Belén communique that it was led by Mexico and Costa Rica, they declare all the 33 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean that the artificial intelligence should not be used into the lethal autonomous weapon systems. So I believe that this is also a part of the strategic cooperation that Latin America can lead also in these topics. The second one is the ethical and cultural considerations. So there's previous examples of what happened in Myanmar with Facebook in 2014, and that we are facing an internal conflict there since then, just 10 years ago, and it was because of this disinformation. This is not related to artificial intelligence, but it's just to give you an idea of what will happen. Also, we have the Aadhaar system in India in 2018 that there was a system who discriminates some citizens regarding just social conditions. Or you can find also in Zimbabwe this Chinese facial recognition that also made like in the context of the government of Zimbabwe, that the government can surveillance their citizens. And we can find also some examples of models that are deployed in Global South countries that they try to treat some things like tuberculosis or Ebola, and when they were trying to implement those models into from frontline workers, it didn't work because they don't have the infrastructure, or they would lack some information, or they don't have all the resources so to implement these kind of models. The third one is economic and technological levels, and then we are mentioning all the potential for training highly capable artificial intelligence models, also the reinforcement learning from human feedback. And we have also considered that, as Sumaya, he couldn't make it for the panel, but the artificial intelligence technology will disseminate through these countries very rapidly. So at the end, right now, for example, in Latin America, you have only 9 supercomputers in the top 500. It doesn't even represent the 2% of the top supercomputers in the world. But at the end, in some years, those capabilities, they will increase. So what are you going to do when these countries will have more capabilities in artificial intelligence? Also, some mentions of Uruguay that is calling for Microsoft or Google to the collocation of data centers in their countries. Also, Costa Rica and Dominican Republic, they are calling to foreign countries to come to these countries to collocate the data centers, and what should be the regulation about that. And the fourth one is political, economic, and social stability, and these are the impacts that some countries in Latin America will face, and we are seeing a very increase an increase in the impact of the tech industry, and the forecasting about this kind of topics is like the artificial intelligence will impact almost 5 to 6% the GDPs of the region. That means it's going to represent almost $500 billion. So that's a lot of money. And in terms of unemployment, it will impact around 35 to 45% of the employment in the region. So at the end, you must be sure that the impacts, for example, in this case of unemployment produced by artificial intelligence, it must be well managed by these countries. Otherwise, you will face phenomena like migration that you are facing right now in the global north, maybe related to other topics, but that's a scenario that we can also can think about it. And the last one is the geopolitical implication, and this is more related with the Cold War during the 20th century, when like Latin American countries were in the middle, and so they have to choose if they go to the United States, they go with the United States, or if they go to the Soviet Union. So we are kind of looked at the same here. It's like, what are you going to do? You are going to be more aligned with the United States, or are you going to be more aligned with China, for example? Or are you going to be in the middle? And these kind of decisions, they have a huge impact in internal politics. So, yeah, so that's the main arguments that we brought to you. And at the end is, how can the Global South participate in AI governance? And then there are many ways. So, and this is not clear. And this is one of the ways that we would like to also incentivize to people to try to think about. So there's going to be a micro governance, there is going to be some national governance, there should be regional governance, or there should be international governance. Because right now, Latin American countries are participating actively in different multilateral organizations. So you have, of course, the United Nations, you have UNESCO, you have the guidelines of the OECD. There also you can have this part of the G77. Or if you consider that most of the supercomputers in Latin America are in Brazil, so what is going to happen with the BRICS? Or is going to be at the Organization of the American States that we are going to discuss these kind of topics? Or is it going to be more regional at the CELAC? or we are going just to be more local at the Comunidad Andina or many other multilateral organizations that we have in the region. So just want to end up with this question. So, well, again, thank you very much for your time. I hope that this could be very useful for you, and we will be pleased to answer your questions. Well, thank you.
All right, thank you, Roberto. Cecil, if you want to join us up here, we'll now go into the Q&A.
First.
Right. So we have a lot of questions here on SwapCard. I think, Roberto, you mentioned in your comments the concept of labor displacement and the impact on the economy in many of these countries from AI. I was just at the UN AI for Good conference in Geneva, where AI was also discussed as a solution to many of these problems in development. So the first question is kind of on this tension of, what is the role of AI globally in terms of between country inequality, as well as on power imbalance between the global north and global south, and what can we do about these two issues? Let me start with you, Roberto.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the question. So the first one, I believe that the perspective right now of the Latin American governments is to take the opportunities of the artificial intelligence. And when we are saying opportunities for artificial intelligence, we are referring to, of course, the economic impact of it. So even though that it may be labor displacement, the governments are thinking that is going to also produce a high peak in productivity in the economy of the countries. So they are looking more for the opportunity to embrace the technology, but they are not wondering right now the risk of them. And that's the point that we would like to highlight as before we say it is, for example, they are thinking, okay, that there's going to be a peak in productivity, but then when happens something of labor displacement, what are you going to do? Do you have already programs that will cover that or not? Or are you thinking that what are you going to do with so many professions that maybe will be erased? And they are not thinking about that. So at the end, I think that in terms of inequality, I'm not pretty sure if the future is good for us in that way, because I think, and this is the call for the governments, that they have to think about these kind of things from now, and not when we are facing the risk in maybe 2030 or maybe in 2035. So yeah, that's the reason. And when you say that you were in Geneva, there is also important to say that some of the governments, they are trying to participate in these scenarios, but they are looking for resources, right? They are looking to access to this technology. So they are going around the world just asking, like Microsoft, Google, or other governments to try to collocate the data centers in the region. And so, again, what is going to happen then with the risk? They are only thinking about maybe the economic benefits of it. Yeah. The second one was, sorry? The differences between the yeah. At the end, I think that I'm very skeptical about it, because at the end is in terms of power, and then the global north, it has to use the power that they have, right? So, for example, in the United States, they can create a law, but at the end, they would like is to benefit their companies, right? And the same in Europe and the same in China. So I don't know. I'm very skeptical that they are going is just to benefit their companies, and maybe this regulation from the global south, they might not be considered, and in part because they can be also a testing grounds from different technologies that they would like to use. That's my perspective, but hopefully I don't know if I'm wrong, but that's my perspective.
Would you like to add anything, Cecil?
Yeah, maybe on the question of the economies and yeah, I think maybe the only thing I might add there is it's really interesting. From the studies we've done, it just seems like the narrative that's winning is AI is very important for economic growth. So we need to figure out how to take advantage of that. Like the studies we've done in a bunch of countries, that's the narrative that's winning. I think this is a risky narrative for those who care about AI X risk. I mean, part of it might be true, to be fair, but then it's also, it might catapult this idea of AI sovereignty, which, I mean, you could say they're poor countries, they're not going to be able to get to AGI or whatever, but I'm sure some people thought Pakistan wouldn't have nuclear weapons long ago. Yeah, anyway, on the other question of power concentration, I think it's definitely a very big concern. How bad power concentration will be, my own opinion, well, just to add that, I think even if there's alignment, assuming there's going to be alignment, the risk of cultural hegemony, another level of cultural hegemony, where because then the very advanced systems are based fundamentally on, I guess, the culture of the people who build them. So what might that mean for already suppressed ways of cultural ways and knowledge? So I'm worried about that, even if there's gonna be alignment. Solutions are, I mean, it's hard to say what the solution would be. I guess just advocacy, advocating hard for more democratization and stuff like that, yeah.
So I think you've both touched on this idea of building up capacity to use AI systems, but there also maybe needs to be capacity to govern them safely in these countries as well. And in recent months, we've seen many countries establish AI safety institutes throughout the world to develop this national expertise specifically on safety. And so I think some people are curious, do you think countries in the global south should also set up ACs, perhaps a regional AC? Should the mandates of these institutions differ from ACs in countries like the UK, who are perhaps more at the frontier of AI development? What do you think the role of this could be?
Okay, I'll go first, yeah. A welcome idea, I think. I can't see any, well, I should be careful, but it doesn't seem to me that there are any obvious downsides to this. Now, yeah, definitely the mandate might be a bit different, because, for example, as I proposed earlier, I'm very worried about the ability of people monitoring what's going on with the frontier AI in these countries. And I feel like that's one thing such a kind of institute might be able to do really well. The only thing I might say is, are there resources to set these things up? Probably not. I mean, I can't think of my home country having the resources to set up an AC. So probably need creative ways to support such institutions. And that requires, I guess, more altruism from some people, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I also welcome the idea, but I'm very skeptical also with it, because in Latin America right now there are only 9 countries that they have a national strategy related to AI. We don't have any laws related to AI right so far. Now there are some proposing bills regarding that, but still the path is very long. And also, the perspective is like, okay, we need to regulate artificial intelligence, but the way that they are thinking right now to regulate artificial intelligence is, for example, from the data privacy perspective. Like, okay, what are we going to do with the data? Or how can we guarantee just some human rights related to when we deploy these systems into society? But it's just a very small part of it. So they are going to create this kind of agencies, but I think that the perspective that from the United States or from the United Kingdom is going to be very different from the agencies that will be created in this context.
There are two kinds of questions continuing on this capacity topic. One about this idea of bargaining power, and how much bargaining power does the Global South have over the North, given that almost all chip production, chip stockpiles, talent are centralized in Global North countries. So someone asks, is building up components of the AI value chain in the Global South a good hedge against centralization of AI in the Global North and a potential way to create levers of influence?
I think that the bargaining power is very low, but I think that, for example, there is an example of Brazil, and there is a fight many years ago with Google, and Brazil is asking to the information of the Brazilians to stay at Brazil, because they say that they are not willing to give the information of their citizens to foreign companies, or that data is in other country, right? So there is this fight that some countries like Brazil can do, and many others can do also related to that, but still it is in some topics, but not in a general perspective of AI governance. So yeah, the bargaining power is very low, but still we have some topics that we can do some things about it.
Yeah, I'm really skeptical. Presumably the components here would be the minerals for chips and maybe the data. I think the weight of capitalism just means that's just not tenable, because will you keep the minerals to build bargaining power, or will you get them sold to generate revenue? I think it's just gonna go one way. As for the data stuff, perhaps, but I think right now it's mostly internet-based data, and unless data privacy law fundamentally changes, I'm not sure they can do anything about that, really. Yeah. So I'm really skeptical. Yeah.
So maybe now talking a little bit about the governance side and how Global South countries can leverage influence there. Cecil, you mentioned, BRICS. You both talked about all of these different fora, G77 plus China, G20, and then of course there's these AI safety summits. So which fora do you think might be most promising for Global South countries to engage and raise their voice? And how could division and fragmentation among these fora be prevented to be best able to leverage this influence?
I think, for example, in Latin America, you can find the OECD. I think that is a very good way to do that, but it's only related to Mexico, Costa Rica, Colombia, and Chile. Yes, so there are only 4 countries. And of course, Brazil is going to look for the BRICS to do so. So it depends on each country, but I believe that those are the most promising ways to do that. Also, related to the meetings that we have also do, in the context of the Organization of American States, like this one of the Belém communique. So this is also very good to say that. But at the end, there is the communique, but in the reality, maybe there is also a gap between the two things, right? So, and that's the reason why, for example, that's the Tlatelolco Treaty. It is, okay, this is a free zone of weapons of mass destruction, but because it's no one in the country like has the power to conduct like a nuclear program, right? So at the end, it will be the same for artificial intelligence. It's like, okay, so we are not going to use it for lethal autonomous weapon systems, but maybe it's because we don't have the capacity also to build these kind of systems. So,
Yeah, I would say I'm most excited about international law, international governance, and I guess mostly because from the research we did, it just seemed like there was something they were able to get done in environmental governance and in trade governance. So I'm excited about that one. And then the cooperation of like the non-government bodies in those countries and in the global north countries, and what that could achieve in terms of pressuring the global north governments to take certain directions specifically. I mean, to be honest, this is one of the things I think we need more research on. Like, I'm very uncertain about, which ones are the best paths forward. And I guess it fit one of the questions that I was laying out as important to study. In terms of how we can avoid fragmentation, man, yeah, I'm again, my views on this are very like just intuitive, and so I'm a bit skeptical that they are very good. But I guess I would suggest maybe if there is strong organization, like on many of these issues, the countries just sort of all get going and try to negotiate on the way they want. But like maybe if they're in advance, there's a lot of organizing that happens before the big moments that might make a difference. Yeah.
Great. I think we have time for one more question. This one's kind of completely different, but this is about the EA funding landscape. And one audience member notes that there's been a shift in the proportion of resources from sort of the poorest of the poor in the global south now towards, Ivy League college graduates and in the global north to work on causes like AI safety. This person asked, could it be argued that the role of the global south is to challenge this instead of asking for a seat at the new table?
Yeah, totally. I don't know if it has been a shift so far, but I think that is something that must be also considered into the effective altruism organization. And I think that the numbers speak by themselves. Like there is almost 70% of the population is in the global south, and there are a lot of things that are happening there. Also, you can consider, like, for example, Cecil, that is studying here in the UK, but he came from the global south, or different people who is very good at the technical aspects, but is working in different companies in the global north. So I think that this is very promising to incorporate like this vision of the global south and how it can also help in the developing on AI governance. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I'm presuming that the alternative of asking for a seat is asking for the money to go back to global health. Yeah. I guess it's you'd have to start by saying AI safety is not as important as it's being made out to be, right? Before you arrive at that conclusion. Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's the most important thing, but like, I think it's pretty important. So I guess I can't accept the kind of matrix that we've been set for here, because I think it's an important question. So I think then we should be asking for a seat.
Great. Well, I think we're out of time. This concludes the session. Please join me in thanking Cecil and Roberto.